Hi, people on Zoom. So as Quinn said, my name is Alex. I am a motion media design major. I'm a junior this year. I am also the co-president for our motion media club called MOMELove. So we have a lot of resources there and really awesome motion designers that we do everything from 2D, 3D, tactile, projection. We do a lot. Anything, basically, if you don't know what MOME is, anything visual that you can ever think up of, pretty much ever, we can make that move. So I have a demo reel. I'm going to show you about like a minute of it, just some like senior student work that you guys can see to get kind of a grasp of all the different styles and types of motion media that we do, since there isn't really one clear, definition of what motion media is. Yeah, I know. I'm opening it up. I'm opening it up. So that's just some of the work that we do. Again, all of these are like individual projects from seniors that have since graduated. But as you can see, we have a lot of different styles and we have a wide range of talent here. So just for application for you guys, if you need a motion designer, we can really fit whatever style you need. You just have to find the right person. And so it's pretty applicable into UX UI. And you might not be able to see it here, and that's why we made a vision video for you guys, so you guys can see how motion media is incorporated into your guys' major.
We know you're busy.
Oh wait, that is not the right one.
You're not busy.
No, we're not busy. Let's see. Oh no. Wait, where's the one that I sent you?
It was on Discord.
Aha, it's here.
And it's right there. We know you're busy, so we wanted to make it easy to track all the different ways you move. Progress tracks the steps you take while you're walking. It also tracks every stair you climb, making it the easiest way to see how many levels you're going up. And of course, since this app was made by frogs, we know there's another special way for you to move. Sometimes you gotta jump.
So that was our quick little vision video for our step tracker that we made. So in here we have a bunch of different types of motion media in here. So adding these little elements here at the bottom with the lily pads and the flowers. We have some mats and masks going on here that we added, and this is called tracking, where we have an object that moves in accordance with another object that's already moving in the scene. And I'm going to show you guys how to do that today and how you guys can do that from a very basic level. Again, if you do need help in the future with this, you can always let a motion designer know. But this hopefully will allow you to get some of the basics down. Do you guys have any questions before we hop over into After Effects? No? Okay, cool. So this is kind of what the project looks like inside of After Effects. And we're going to start off with just an overview of what the UI in here looks like, so you can kind of get your bearings in the program. So first of all, we're going to go into like where the project files are. So, first of all, when you have your footage or you have your assets, where do they go? So over here on the left side of this is the project files panel. And as you can see, there are a few folders in here labeled footage, pre-comps, render me, solids, and UI screen assets. Now, all of these are folders that I created in here so that I can easily organize what I'm looking for, so that when I'm, 5 hours deep into animating something, it's easy to find something. What you can do if you need to make a new folder is you can right-click with your mouse and then hit New Folder, and you can title it whatever you want, and then hit Enter. And this is organized alphabetically in here, so you can drop whatever you need to wherever you want. Personally, I like to make sure that the footage is in one section. So anytime I have footage, I drop all of the footage that I made into one folder. I put all of my pre-comps that I make, which I will go over what pre-comps are and how you make them shortly, but I have one folder for all of those. I have one folder for rendering, because when you render in Media Encoder, and it will open up all of the compositions that you have. And so it's really easy if you just have one folder that's your render folder with your final big project in it. So you just click that and you don't need to spend any extra time digging around in your files for it. The solids, we'll go over that in a little bit. And then any assets. So if I drop in any images, like text files, whatever I have, all of that goes into like this folder. I may make some extra folders depending on how big and how long the project is. So please feel free to adjust that to your needs. This isn't like the end all be all of folder creation here, but that's just how I organize my folders. Do you guys have questions about folders? Cool. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the timeline panel. So down here at the bottom, this whole section here is the timeline. And it has this little blue bar, which is the tracker bar. And you can scrub through anything, any footage, any shape layers, text layers, whatever you have in here. All of it will be created on this side. This is the name right here under layer name. And then if you click on it, this entire bar is like highlighted, and that's how you know that your layer is being selected. You can select more than one layer by clicking on a layer and holding shift to click and go that way. You can shift click to select a lot, or if you want to select ones that maybe aren't right next to each other, you can hit Control on a Windows computer or Command on a Mac computer, and then you can select them individually as one. So the timeline is how you organize your layers and how you organize what footage goes where. So as you can see, we have down here at the bottom, just to kind of show you what this looks like, is this raw footage goes throughout the entire piece. The raw footage is going to be there for the whole time. You can cut up your video however you want and have multiple layers of your footage on here, but that's kind of up to how you want to cut it. You can cut it in another program and then bring an entire MP4 into here, or you can just bring in your footage and then cut it up in After Effects. It's really whatever works best for you. But we have one raw footage here because Clint made that and sent it to me. And then as you can see, the first thing here is on the timeline here, going from left to right, is at about 1 second, there is the lily blast. And you can see that it happens and pops up right there and then goes away. But there's a lot of elements on the screen and you're like, why are there so many elements but only one layer? There's no way you could have done that with one layer. And that's correct, I didn't. What this is this is called like a pre-composition. And what that does is it holds a lot of elements inside of it, kind of like a folder for your comp. If you want to open up your pre-composition, what you can do is you can double click on it and you can see you're brought to a new section. You know where you are on the timeline, or like in which pre-comp you are, right in here in this little section right above your timeline. As you can see here, this is the Frogger Vision video. That's the name that I have picked for my main comp where all of the final elements are going. And then I have a bunch more here, which are a bunch of different pre-compositions inside my whole piece. And the Lily Blast one is right here. These, you can organize them in whatever way you want. You can close them out and then reopen them from like the folder that you have here. It's really up to you what you want to have here. But if you can't find it, you can always go into your timeline again and reopen your pre-comp. And then all the little layers for the elements you have will be in there. So that's what a pre-comp is, and that's how a pre-comp organizes information inside of it. So it's a very handy way to make sure that this screen at the end doesn't get cluttered, because as you can see, like that little section has 5 layers in it. And that's just for one little tiny blast. If you did that for this entire piece, you would have like 70 layers, and scrolling through it would be really obnoxious, and you don't want to do that. It wastes a lot of your time. So use pre-comps. If you want to make a pre-comp, then all you need to do is highlight the layers that you want in your pre-composition. So I'm just going to make an extra pre-comp. You don't need to double pre-comp hardly ever. But if you have all these layers, and let's say that these were in this main folder, right? And I'm like, oh, I really need these in a pre-comp. These cannot be in the main folder. And so I'm going to select all of them by left-clicking on one and then holding Shift to select all of these all the way down. Right-click on the layers. You can do it over here, or you can do it over in the layer name. It doesn't really matter where you do it. And you're going to hit this pre-compose button right here. There is not a hotkey for this, so you will have to just right-click and pre-compose every time. And then you get to pre-compose and pick your name for it. So I'm just going to name this Lily Blast Test Demo, so I know to remove it. And then you can just make sure it says Open New Composition, so that when you hit OK, it will open up your window in that new composition. You don't need to find it. And then you're going to hit OK. And what that does is it moves every element that you have into this new composition. You can see it's named Lily Blast Demo. And if you want to make sure that it's correct, go to the previous place where you used the pre-comp. This was the original Lily Blast layer where all the elements were on, and you can see now that everything has been made into a pre-composition. If you need to access it, again, you can click up here, or you can double click inside your layers panel and it will open it up in that new section. Do pre-comps kind of make sense? Okay, cool.
One question.
Yeah.
So when you do the pre-comp, you want to do it decisively in the final, so like would it be like this, or can I do it like a close up and then put it on the side?
Yeah, you definitely can do it as like something smaller. That will help when you're inside this window right here. It will definitely help so that if you're trying to like look at it as a RAM render, which is like live, since none of this is like live rendered, you have to render it out. This will help your RAM render since there's less like map that you have to render with it. It's blank, but it still has to, consider it. So that does make it faster. And sometimes it's helpful to make the compositions bigger if you need to do like a pan. Let's say you needed to like double the width of this, and then you would pan left or right inside this main piece, and you would put that in and then move it left to right. So yeah, that is something we do a lot. Any other questions about the pre-comps? Okay, cool. One thing is if you want to change the size of your pre-comp, it is per each composition. So just to go off that real quick, if let's say this is my comp and I'm like, I need this to be a massive comp, you're going to go to composition up here and then composition settings. The command for that is Control K or Command K on a Mac. You're just going to open up your composition settings, and that is just for the one that you have selected. So this won't change any other composition that you have in your entire piece, and you can't apply it to every composition. So you have to do them individually. This is the name, so I know I'm on the correct layer. And then you can go in here and you can change it to be whatever you want. I'm not going to hit OK because it's going to take a minute to think, but you can adjust each individual composition's frame rate. You can adjust the time, the duration, background color, and it's very specific to each pre-comp. So you can get highly detailed with this, and it's very, very helpful. One thing is there is no way to like comp out like this is a composition that I want to duplicate over and over. You just have to make a new composition and then do what you previously did, but it will save your settings so you can add it that way. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So next we're going to talk about the effects panel. So now that you know like what a pre-comp is and like how that sort of works in your timeline, we're going to go over here to the right side of the screen where we have all of these fancy things. So something that we use all the time is called effects and presets. And all of these come with After Effects. So whenever you download it, again, you can get After Effects with your like SCAD student subscription for free. So you all have After Effects. And anything that you want to like add, if you need to really make this footage really crazy, for example, you can search up whatever you want. You kind of need to know the names for these, but you can always look online. It's like if I need some sort of like mesh distorter, it would be called like mesh warp, but you can look it up on the internet and most of the time it will tell you what you need. When you find one that you want, you can left click and then drag it onto whatever footage you want. This can be done to a text layer. This can be done to footage, shape layers, rasterize, unrasterize, whatever you got, it can do it. So you can add it on here, and then, so now I know that well, you could see that it changed physically, like, but also up here on the left side, this is the effect controls panel. And what this does is I can see, okay, this is the Frogger Vision video raw footage, and in it, there is a wave warp, and it is an effect because it has this little FX on the side. And so you can go through and change any type of, any type of wave that you want. You can go and adjust the wave height to make it sort of really blurry. You can make the width, which is just like how thick each individual wave is. So you can get very, very fancy with the effect controls. You can also set keyframes to make them adjust the width over time. It's a whole time really. So you can go through here. I'll explain keyframes in a little bit, but you can really go crazy with the effects, which is how we get a lot of the crazy things we do. So you can adjust like the speed for how fast it moves over time, because this is you're looking at one frame right now. I'm not going to hit play because it's going to break my After Effects because it's like a lot of waves. But if you do hit play, then it will go pretty fast and look like that for all of it. So it's pretty fast, pretty cool. And that's how you add effects onto your compositions. One thing to note is certain types of effects. You just have to see which ones do this, but certain types of effects will fit only the composition inside, like the layer that you have. So you can kind of see that it's doing it up to the edge. And so if you needed this to have full arcs on your waves, what you would want to do is either increase the composition size, decrease the footage size in your composition, make that into a pre-comp that's like larger, and then scale down the pre-comp in whatever final you want so that it has the proper wave settings. A lot of the times what I do is if I need edges to have waves, I pre-comp something out, and then I make the composition really big so all the waves fit inside that composition, and then I scale it down so that inside the composition you can't see all of the edges, just what I want in there. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, good. This is you guys are very easy. If you ever want to delete one, you can just click on it and hit delete. Just double check in your effects panel up here. You can also go in here on the timeline that you have and see, okay, like what do I have? I have a motion tracker. I don't have anything in the transform. If you need to check to see if you have any keyframes that maybe you forgot to delete, you can just hit U on your keyboard and it will bring up any keyframes that you have in that entire layer. So if you're like, I know I made a keyframe somewhere, I don't know where, but it's somewhere, just hit U and it will bring up every keyframe for any property that you have. This can be inside an effect. It can be inside one of the regular transforms, which is like scale, position, stuff like that. So it'll bring up for really anything that you're looking for. Okay, so we kind of covered how to switch between pre-comps already. So I'm going to move over to the phone UI since, and the phone UI is right here. So it's like the little scroll and it goes through and then has the step counter. So we're going to kind of talk about how this was created and what I did for it. Okay, so here we have the, this is the phone, and this background you see is like this like pinkish red, but since there's no actual layer, this comes off as transparent in the main one. So whatever you set your background to, you cannot set it to like that checkered thing that shows it as transparent. But if you need to check the transparency, you can click this little button here, which is a toggle transparency grid. And so then you can see, okay, this is the only thing that's going to be showing up on my final. So if you need to, this is how you make that transparency grid show up. Just make sure that you don't have any large like rectangle or something that's your background. Some people find it more helpful to have this toggled. I prefer to have this just because it's a nicer contrast between the elements that I have, so I can kind of see what I have on my composition. And again, you can change the composition colors by going into comp settings, changing the background like that, and then you're good to go. So you can kind of fit that to whatever you need, really. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about how I made this phone UI screen. So as you can see, the animation is it scrolls and it scrolls. Nothing too crazy, but a lot of this is used with masks, controllers, and a null object. And so how that works is we have what you can see here inside the phone is one type of pre-comp. And I'm just going to click on it to show you. So this has like all of the like little tiny elements in here. And as you can see, it gets very long. So all of this is one pre-comp. It's still nothing moving in it, but we just need that sort of like image to have there. You can, of course, export this as a PNG if you know you don't want movement. But if you want your motion designer or you to animate this in any aspect with, let's say, moving the lily pads or making them adjust in scale, then you're going to want to have each individual element on a separate layer, as you can see here. So each one of these is a different composition. So we have this original screen image, which is this one with the Frogger. The next one that we have is the all stats one that shows the steps and stairs. And the last thing is this little rectangular like white divider that we have in between each of the two compositions. So that's the only step that you're seeing on here. And the phone is just a phone with a transparent center. I definitely would suggest using transparent elements like this because it just makes it so easy to work with it. You just put the phone on top, and then what you need to do is you have your phone, and then you need to make a mask. So I'm gonna just turn this off so you can kind of see. Now you have a white screen, and you're like, how did you do that? Well, that's because this mask is you just basically make a rectangle. We'll make another one over here just so you can kind of see. So when you make a rectangle, the best thing to do is to use this with shape layers. So this is the shape layer. When you make it, you can just hold, click, and drag, and it will open it up. And now I have my rectangle. So this is the new shape layer down here. You can see when I select it here, the color here is blue, and the outline of this is also blue. You can adjust the way that the color is by clicking on this little blue square, and it will bring up all of these different colors. So if you prefer to label it in a specific manner, like I do, then you can adjust it that way. It can also get a little confusing if you have 70 layers and they're all blue and it's like shape 47. So make sure that when you're going through here, you can color code your layers, and then you also can rename your layers by right-clicking on the layer and hitting rename. Then you just type it in and hit enter. So just make sure that your organization is, how it works best for you or how it works best for whoever you're working with on the project. So now that you have this, we need to mask out an element. So we're going to take this extra like home screen piece. And as you can see, it's its own element. It's just kind of hanging out. This is an exact copy of what we see here. But if you notice, this one on the actual phone has rounded corners. So what we need to do to match what we have here is take the phone screen asset that we have. And we're going to bring up the phone to the top layer. So make it big. That's the wrong phone screen. Hold on. Okay. So we're going to take this phone screen, and this is the Apple one. It's an exact copy of the one that we just had. I'm going to save because I feel like After Effects might crash soon and that's going to scare me. So we're going to take this and we want to match this white piece to the inside of our phone. And the reason why we need to do that is because that is going to act as sort of a mat where all the other information can go through. And that's how we get this nice scroll effect where nothing comes off the edges. So I'm just going to sort of bring these little handles back and forth just to kind of fit my phone screen how I want it. If you notice, there is a little bit of the white corner poking out here. So what you can do if you need to round out your corners is select the layer that you have on the little drop down arrow. And then you're going to want to go to add and then round corners. And then what that will do is you can bring in the radius to round out your rectangle to kind of fit whatever shape you have. It's really easy if you have an iPhone or some phone that has like a very specific like rounded piece with a transparency in the middle. If you don't have a transparent element, then what you'll need to do is put the mat on top of the phone screen, which is just a lot more difficult to do. So if you have just a transparent outline of the phone case or whatever that you have, definitely use that because it's so much easier. Okay, so now that we have our little phone element inside the bounds of the case, now we need to make sure that this fits in here. So what we're going to do is, it seems counterintuitive, but we're actually going to bring this layer of the Frogger and move it underneath the mat. And so what we're going to do now is called an alpha mat. So in these track mats, you have to select your layer, and then there's different types of mat. There's no mat, which is what we're looking at now with all of the layers visible in their respective areas. As you can see, the white is above it, and there's no mat, which means, yeah, the white layer is going to be on top of the Frogger. That's pretty straightforward. What the alpha mat does is it takes this home screen layer and fit it to whatever shape you have above it. So I'm going to click that. And now you can see that it's not poking out of the edges. It stays within the confines of the shape. And I'm just going to turn off the phone so you can kind of see. I can drag this, and wherever it goes, it will stay inside the confines of that little shape. So it's reaching all the edges here, and it's not gonna pass that shape. You can move the shape over if you want. You can do really whatever you want with it, but it will stay within the confines of that. I would make sure that when you're doing stuff like this, please make sure that you line up your layers beforehand, because it can be a little confusing if your layer is off to the side over here. You do an alpha mat and you're like, my layer is gone, I have no idea where it is. So make sure you line up your layers beforehand, and then it should show up exactly where it is. There are a few other types of mats here that can get a little bit confusing. The alpha mat basically just sort of like inverts it. So instead of the Frogger showing up wherever the mat is, it will show up wherever the mat isn't. So now you can see it basically flips it. And then the Luma mats are a little bit much, and we don't use them as often. So I would just stick to using the alpha mat or alpha inverted mat. Those are pretty good. And you can always, switch through, scroll through just to check for yourself, like, what does it do? And it's non-destructive. So you can always go back and it won't damage any layers that you have that aren't rasterized. So you should be good to go. Okay, I'm glad After Effects is not crashing. It looked like it's going to crash like 3 times. So does that sort of make sense for how to do masking in After Effects? Right. Okay.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so my After Effects has the layers with source names, but I can't find the mode and the track map within the bottom left corner.
Oh, so you don't see this little track mat
Yep.
section? Okay. That might be in your window section, or you can try to like pull this out. My After Effects might look a little bit different than yours, so I would go through the like windows and view to see where your track mat is. Do you have this little T here at all?
No, I only have layer names and it jumps to those 6, 7 different icons immediately. I don't have the mode or the T. Wait.
So if you right click on here and you go to columns, it doesn't show you the sections. If you can see the source name and you want to go
All
to
right.
columns.
All right, cool. I managed to right click it out. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So are there any other questions about masks or matting or stuff not showing up? Okay, cool. So just for the sake of time, we're not going to do this with like multiple elements. But in order to get the scroll, as you can see, there are a lot of different elements that are moving together. And if you notice, again, each one of these elements, like I mentioned before, we have the home screen matted to this rectangle. I duplicated this rectangle multiple times, so there are 3 of the same exact rectangles. They're all in orange right here, and I prefer to label all of my masks, keep them in an orange layer, as you can see here with these 3. Any masks I have, I always type in mask in all caps, and then whatever the layer that it's masking to. So for the rectangle divider, it's orange and it says mask rectangle divider. That way, if I'm ever looking inside of all of the layers, it's pretty easy to see where my layers are and which things are masked to it. Sometimes if you have multiple layers masked to the same thing, it can be, you might have to just figure out what will work best for your workflow to, you know, like rearrange the layer names, but that's what I've always found works the best for me. So we have all of these elements here. The main page, we have the little white bar, and then we have the step counter. All of that is parented to their own individual pieces. And then we're going to talk about parenting and null objects. And null objects, the best way I can explain a null object to you is that it's kind of like a component in Figma. So it will have a the null object. I'll just make one right now for you guys so you can see what it looks like. You're going to want to go to layer, new, and then null object. You can hit Control Alt Shift Y or Command Option Shift Y, and that will make a new null object. And it just appears right here in the center of your composition that you have. When you have it, it is very important that before you do any sort of position movement, before you change anything about the piece, you're going to want to go here to the pan behind tool. And what this does is it sets the anchor point. So anytime you have an object, right? If my anchor point is in the center and I do a rotation, the object is going to move around the center. If I move it to the bottom of the anchor point, then anytime I do a rotation, it's going to move around the bottom. So it's very important that if you notice, this little guy right here, this little diamond shaped dude, is what the anchor point looks like in After Effects. So if it's on this corner, that means anytime I do a position movement, it's going to base it around that anchor point. Again, rotation, it's going to be around that anchor point. So what you can do is hold down Control or Command and then double click, and it will bring your anchor point automatically to the exact center of that layer, object, null layer, whatever you have. It will bring it to the exact center of that. This works for text layers too. So this is the best way to like really quickly put your anchor point to the center without having to do like snapping or guesstimating. And now that we know it's in the center, just going to move my little null object over here. There's nothing inside of it, like you can't put a text layer like inside of a null. But what you can do is you can parent a text layer to a null. And we're going to do that with this. So as you can see, so we have our phone, we have our null, and real quick, we're just going to move this null over here, and we're going to rename the null, just again, right clicking and then hitting rename. And then I like to call it control. I like to have the word controller in there somewhere, just so I know that that null object is what is going to be controlling a certain type of movement. So the other one I named scroll control. So I'm just going to name this one scroll control demo since we're doing a demo. And if you see down here, we have the scroll control for the original one, and it has 2 large movements on this little red layer. And again, it says scroll control, it's red. This is red and going up. So I keep all of my null objects as red because again, that helps me visually. If I'm like, where's my object? Click on here, whatever the red thing on there is, that's where my null is. So that's why keeping the colors is very important. So now that I have this, I'm going to actually bring this down, because before I parent, if wherever your null object is in relation to the other object that you want to parent it to, if I start it here and then I'm like, okay, so I'm going to parent my my home screen image to my controller. And now if I move this, it's going to move. And since it's already in the center and I know that I need to do a big scroll up, if I had like all the elements parented to this and I had to scroll it all the way up, the null object would be going out of the screen. And that's totally okay. You can have your null object be like thousands of pixels above your screen, but you also can't see what it's doing. So the best thing to do is before you parent it, consider how much movement you need that controller to have. So I knew for this one that this was going to need to have a lot of vertical movement in order for the null object to stay within the confines of my composition so I could see it and see how much it was moving. So I'm like, okay, we're going to bring this null object down. And then I'm going to take my home screen image. And on the right side here, it says parent and link. And so this is a good way to parent the entire object to your null object. So I'm going to click this and it shows every single layer that I have in just this pre-comp. You cannot parent between pre-comps. So if you need to have an object in one composition and in another, just duplicate it and have it be the same over multiple compositions, because you cannot pre-comp, or like you can't parent to any object, any null object, any layer that is outside of the pre-comp you're working in. So I'm just going to hit scroll control demo, because that is my little null object right here. And I'm going to click it. And so now I'm able to scroll with impunity, and it just lets me scroll all the way up. And then if I had the multiple layers like I did on this one, then you would basically duplicate all of these layers and then connect them to the same controller so that they all scroll simultaneously. And that's how you get that really even scroll that you have here that looks really nice. Because if you don't do that and you choose to move each individual layer at the same time and give all of them keyframes so that they all move together, if you need to move one of these layers, you're going to have to adjust it on every single keyframe. And if you need to make a keyframe, I can show you how to do that. So I'm going to move this null back to the bottom and just show you real quick how to make a keyframe and save After Effects so it doesn't crash. You should always be saving your After Effects when you're working, because this crashes frequently and it's not a fun time. So just change it. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this null object moves from down here all the way up to here, because I'm just going to make it go off of the phone screen. So we're going to start with the null object here, and I need to move just the position. I don't need to make the scale bigger. I don't need to adjust the rotation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit P for position on the layer that I've selected, and it will bring up this little position section. There's a little stopwatch here that you can click, and this will create one keyframe on the time where your little blue timer is. So at this one exact point in time, I'm telling After Effects that right here, my null object needs to be exactly in this point in time. And if I want to move up for 2 seconds, and I'm like, okay, I need my null object to be here at 2 seconds, then I'm going to, what you can do is you can just move your null object and it will create a new keyframe for you, because you already have your first keyframe saying it needs to be here at 0 seconds and it needs to be here at 2 seconds. So After Effects interpolates, okay, if I'm starting here and I need to be here and this is the time that I have to do it, each one of these little dots is where one frame of that movement will be. So you can scroll along this whole thing and you can see it stops at every single dot all the way up. And that's how you know that your piece is parented. And you can do some very fancy things with the movement. These are linear keyframes, which means there is no fast to slow, slow to fast, like fast, stop, go, crazy, whatever you want to do. There isn't going to be any of that. Oh, the first crash. There we go. I was waiting. I'm like, it's going to happen. Oh, it didn't crash. Okay. I guess it just needed to think for a minute. Cool. So that's how you make keyframes here in After Effects. And if you look at a composition from someone who already has like been working in After Effects for a while, you may actually not see too many keyframes in certain layers, and that's because you can actually use like JavaScript and expressions to write in what you want the movement to do, and it will just kind of do it. I'm not going to show that now because that's very advanced and hard, and I also am not fully sure how to do a lot of it, so I can't tell you. But it is possible. I can get like a grad student to come in and explain it. We have a lot of those. So that's how null objects work. Again, you can parent multiple pieces to it. Just as you can see, all of these layers again are parented to the same original scroll control, so they all move together. And that's kind of how you make that sort of movement. Do null objects make sense with parenting? What's that?
Why would you use a null object for the motion instead of just putting the motion up with the screen, like the progress screen up there?
Do you mean like instead of doing each layer and scrolling it?
Yeah, like we parented the progress screen to the null object. Why don't we just, do all the motion on the progress screen?
Yeah, that's because when you have all of these separate layers right here, if you do each of the keyframes individually, you definitely can. But if you open up all the position keyframes for it, you'll have one keyframe for each spot here. You'll have the keyframe for when they need to stop and when they need to go. You need to make sure the easing is exact per frame, per position, per layer, and make sure that all the easing is exactly the same. And you can do that. If you have the idea and you're like, I want to do this, no one's going to stop you. But if you need to change it at all, then you're going to have to adjust every single keyframe that you've already created in order to adjust that movement, instead of just doing 3 keyframes in your null object and then parenting everything that way. It makes the movement a lot sleeker. It makes sure everything is connected exactly how you created it. And it also reduces your render time. If you have like the 12 keyframes, that's going to take a little bit longer to render than just the 3 with the easing you have, because it has to consider the speed and velocity that you have it set to. And it also has to consider each frame in between of the keyframes that you set for interpolation. So it just takes longer. And, why would you do that when you can just speed up your workflow? You have other stuff to do. So use null objects when you can. You don't need to use them for every single thing, but they're very, very handy to use. Any other questions about null objects and stuff like that? Okay, cool. The last thing on this section I'm going to show you guys is how to ease your keyframes. You heard me mention that this is 2 linear keyframes. And so what that looks like is I'm just going to highlight these and show you what the graph looks like. So this is a speed graph. And as you can see here, it is moving at 100 pixels per second. And since this line is flat, that means it is moving at 100 pixels per second for the entire duration between these 2 keyframes. And it's just these 2 keyframes. After the 2 keyframes are over, it will tell you that if I have like 7 keyframes, it will show you each individual keyframe if you have all of them highlighted. But since there aren't, it's just these 2. And you can see by these little yellow indicators, this is where one keyframe is, and this is where another keyframe is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ease the keyframes so we can get fancy over here. The hotkey for it is just hitting F9. This is for both PC and Mac. And now you can see, wow, the keyframes changed. They're little hourglasses now. They're so fancy. So this is the shape of an eased keyframe. That is what they're called. They're called eased keyframes. And then if you want to look at, the graph now, you can always click on highlight your keyframes and hit this little button. This is the graph editor. Wow, amazing. If any of you like physics, you will like this. If you don't, then I'm so sorry. But now you can see that the movement here, I'm just going to let it RAM render for a sec. I'm going to save first and then let it RAM render. Just kidding. But the graph says that it will start off slow, and then it will move to about, I don't know, like 600 pixels per second. And then by the end, slow back down to 0. So now you can see that it goes fast. It stops rendering. Just a sec. We're going to reduce that. So now it starts slow, moves a little faster in the middle, and then slows down again. And you can actually adjust these to make that movement a little bit more intense by clicking on one of these keyframes that you have. And then you can pull out these little Bezier handles. And then you can adjust the influence that that curve has. So now this will make it start slower, get a little bit faster, really fast, and then slow back down again. And so that is kind of how I made the scrolls. So I just, each one of these is like a little swipe and then bring it back over. So if you do multiple of these types of keyframes, then you can get a very nice scroll motion going, which is what I use with this other null object. It's very handy for stuff like UI. So this type of arc is like, or like line form is one that's really common. And then this is also one that has the fastest movement at the front and then the slowest movement at the end. So it will pop up and then slow back down. You can get like pretty in depth with how you want to do these. Like you can set, like this might not make much sense, but you can separate your keyframes between the X and Y positions and then do each one individually to sort of hone that in a bit more. It does take a lot more time to do it that way, but that's how you get more like original eases. So that's kind of how you ease your keyframes. Again, the hotkey for it is F9, and then you can do magic things in the graph editor. How are we doing with the keyframes? Feeling good? People on Zoom? Good. Oh, thank you for the little emoji. I appreciate that. Okay.
All good.
All right. So we have 8 minutes. Can I talk about tracking, or do we need to leave?
I think we can do a very brief overview.
Okay.
Just showing what the interface looks like and
Cool.
for the resources.
Cool. We're gonna do speed tracking. So do all of you know what tracking is? No. Okay, that's cool. So we have this individual right here, and as you can see, I'm gonna just scrub through it, but you can see this the little lily pad here moves exactly with his head as it goes along. Now, what that is that's tracking. So it's taking an element and copying basically the position of any other element that you have. You can pick whatever you want it to be. I could have parented it to like the light if I wanted. And so how that works is I took, oh, hello, After Effects. So we have this layer right here, which is what that individual layer is. And so I took this right here. This might be a little bit confusing, but you need to make sure that you take your raw footage that you have. And then on the right side again, you're going to go over to tracker. And then this is the fun panel where you get to track your motion. You can track camera's motion, you can stabilize stuff, but this is a little confusing. Even for like motion designers, it takes like 3 or 4 weeks for us to go over all this. So if it doesn't make sense, that's okay. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hit the like track motion button and make sure you have the raw footage selected. You know that you've done it properly if up here you have raw footage.mpeg, because that's what the name is. And then you have this little fancy track point. So you can like zoom in and you should move your track point to whatever you want to track. Now for this, I chose to track this little, clip element in his hair. And you can move it really anywhere you want. This little X will show you what exactly it's tracking. And this little box will say, okay, I want to make sure that I track this image right here. It's very important that when you're tracking to make sure that whatever it is you're tracking has high contrast in comparison to whatever else you have. So if this hat were red, for example, that would be a really good thing to track because red on white is pretty high contrast. Since the hat is very similar color, the tracking will go crazy and not understand what it's tracking. So make sure you fit this to a little bit larger than the object that you want. Make sure the entire object. So I just, want this little part of the hat tracked on this little metal band right here. This larger box sort of gives you like an extra buffer barrier, and it's really finicky. So sometimes if you go to track the keyframes and your tracker moves halfway across the screen, just finesse the box that you have here because it might it just has a lot of trouble sometimes if the contrast isn't enough, if the barriers aren't large enough. So it's very finicky depending on the item that you're tracking, the amount of motion that it has, and like the size of it. So it's a little finicky. But once you have it decided that, okay, I'm going to track this piece, then what you're going to want to do is hit this little play button called Analyze. And what that will do is it will say, okay, so I'm going to follow, this like hat movement all the way. And for like however it moves, you're going to hit it and it will start to play your footage. And as you can see, like this is, we're speed tracking here, but it's sort of following what you want. And I'm just going to pause it here so it doesn't track the whole thing. But now you can see that there's an individual keyframe for every single frame of movement. And so that is pretty exact on to where the hat is. And then all you're going to need to do is when you have like whatever footage you want, you're going to take a null object. So null objects coming in handy again. I'm going to use the Control-Alt-Shift or Command-Option-Shift-Y key to make a new null object here on my layer. And then, so I have my new null object, and then basically you're just going to take the keyframes that you have here and set up a target. So it will move the position keyframes to where you want it. I'm going to select null 11 right here. So I can say, okay, I want all the keyframes that I just made to go to this null object. You select that new null, you hit OK, and then you hit apply. It will say X and Y to just make sure that that is the position will count for everything that's on the X axis and the Y axis. Just leave it like this. So it will say OK, and then your keyframes will show up here in your null object. So now my null is moving, as you can see, this null is moving along the keyframes here. Since I know what I'm that I don't need to adjust the anchor point for this because it's just like tracking. I didn't adjust it, but if you just think about where your anchor point is again before you do stuff. And then this is my fake step demo piece. And then all you need to do is parent it to the null. And now it moves. It's only a few keyframes, but you can see now this one right here moves with the null object that you have. So then you can move really anything, whatever image you want. You can animate inside of this composition too to make it move while it's moving with the null. So you can get pretty fancy with it, and it's really good for if you have someone texting and then a little text bubble pops up. It's really helpful for that. Does that kind of explain nulls? I'm sorry, I know that was really fast and tracking, but
Could I ask to
Yeah.
see how do you apply the motion tracker to the null object one more time?
Yeah, for sure. So you're going to want to make sure that your footage is selected that has all of the keyframes on it right here. And then make sure that you are inside the raw footage layer up here at the top. This is where the motion tracking happens because it's in the specific layer and not inside the composition layer itself. And then you're going to want to go to motion target and hit edit target. And the target is just where you want the keyframes to go to. And so then you're going to select the null or whatever object that you want all of your X and Y keyframes to move over to. You're going to hit OK. And just so you know, that layer null 11 is, this one right here. And then you're going to hit apply. And what that will do is it will bring this mess of keyframes, simplify them into X and Y positions, and then put them onto that null object so that that null object will then move with those X and Y keyframes. After that, you can just parent whatever you want to the null, and then your object will move exactly with the null. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions over here? Okay, cool. Well, the only thing that we didn't really get to is typography and how to make that sometimes you got to jump thing move. It's just position and scale keyframes, which we kind of went over. So there really wasn't anything, fancy with that. So if this made sense, then you can apply it to the text pretty easily. If there aren't really any other questions before we go, I just wanted to share with you guys a few resources for starting to learn motion design. There are a few YouTube channels here, and this will be available to you after the workshop, in addition to the After Effects file that I was just working on. So if you want to poke around in there or mess with it or destroy it, please feel free. So these are a few YouTube channels that are pretty good for like intermediate, advanced, and beginner level stuff. So you can really look at whatever you want and sort of absorb at the pace that you feel good about doing. Also, shameless self-promo here. I'm starting a company called What the Motion, which is the whole point of it is to teach people motion graphics from a very beginner level, from like, I have no idea what the pen tool is, where it is, how to use it. I'm confused. So, because sometimes it's a little bit hard to get into motion graphics because After Effects looks really scary. I remember the first time I looked at After Effects, I legitimately almost cried because I'm like, I can't do this. This is very hard. So I want to sort of ease that for people as you go into After Effects. I'm going to be like releasing a lot of content. It's all going to be pretty much on YouTube and Instagram, tutorial videos starting from the basics of basics. And that's all going to start in December. I'm going to do a big launch on Instagram and YouTube. So if you want to look at that, you all know me. So any of you can reach out to me anytime you want. If you're like, your tutorial was confusing and I didn't get it, which hopefully is not the case. But you can always message me anytime if you have questions. And just as a sneak peek, I'm preparing like a whole bunch of resources, such as hotkeys. I'm going to move this over so everyone can see. But these are like very good beginner hotkeys. So you can open up all of the like position, opacity, you know, create new null object. We talked about that one. These are also just some like quality of life, like how do I quickly switch to the next keyframe or the previous keyframe? And I have them here for Windows and for Mac. So whatever you're using, you can, if this is applicable for everything, I'm going to have this for After Effects, Photoshop, ZBrush, like whatever you can think of that's motion design related, which is a lot of things. I'm going to have all of this color coded in here for you guys. I'm not technically releasing this to like the public until December. So, but this will be available to you guys after the workshop as just like a freebie. Also, please watch my stuff. So yeah, all this will be available to you guys afterwards. And if you have any questions about incorporating motion design into your work, you guys can message me personally anytime. Or if you'd like to talk to anybody in the motion department, please let us know. If you guys have seniors that you're working on, we have a bunch of motion designers that would be happy to work on seniors with you guys, or just give you any tips if you're like, I have no idea how to do this. Can somebody please help me? Like, we got you. So if you have any questions, please let us know anytime. We have a Discord and an Instagram. So if you guys want those, you can come to me after and I can share those with you guys. Sorry, I'm gonna stop talking now. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns? Anyone on Zoom? Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. I hope that this was helpful and all the resources will be available to you guys out there. Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't realize that. I thought. This is from Uniqlo. This is from